Hello, my name is Ezenwa Ngbenu, and the topic of this discussion is how to resolve autism through the GAPS protocol. And GAPS stands for Gut and Psychology Syndrome. This talk is basically a summarization of the work of Dr. Natasha Campbell-Mcbride, who is a neurologist and neurosurgeon, and she began her work related to autism because her son was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2. And she looked within the confines of her discipline, that is neurology, and she found that there were no viable treatments or therapies. Now she began her own research where she discovered that there is a striking relationship between gut disturbances and brain disturbances, and the relationship is causal. That is, the root of many neurological and psychiatric conditions is in fact in the digestive tract. Now she utilized that insight to create a nutritional approach that she used to cure her son of autism. And she systematized that practical experience and created the GAPS protocol. That is the Gut and Psychology Syndrome protocol, which she utilizes in her own practice, where she has cured hundreds of cases of autism and many other neurological and psychiatric conditions. And she also trains many medical practitioners around the world in the GAPS protocol. And in many ways, her work has created a new field in medicine that one can call nutritional psychiatry. Now, I would suggest that you visit her website, www.gaps.me, for a fuller discussion of the GAPS protocol and its powerful applications in many neurological and psychiatric conditions, not only autism. So, a good place for us to start is, what is autism? Well, autism is a neurodevelopment disorder. So we recognize that the brain is an exceedingly complex organ, and accordingly it takes a very long time for the brain to fully grow, develop, and mature. We find that even in late adolescence, the brain is still in this process of development. Well, autism is a disruption in the development and maturation of the brain that occurs very early on. So autism or symptoms of autism appear typically before age 3. And some classical symptoms of autism involve difficulties in communication, difficulties in learning, and also a tendency towards repetitive behaviors. But I must state that autism is highly individualized. So in each case, it is a different collection of symptoms. So autism is a spectrum of various things. Now, with that being said, there is a controversy in the causes of autism. Now, the mainstream position is that autism is caused by genetic mutation. And I believe that if one takes an objective look at the statistics related to autism, you will find that autism cannot be primarily a genetic condition. And in many ways, the research also bears this out, because so far, genetic mutations only account for 1% of cases of autism. But let me explain what I mean by autism cannot really be a genetic condition. So, in the 1970s, autism was a very rare condition. Many pediatricians had never encountered it and were completely unaware of its existence. So in the 1970s, roughly, autism occurred in 1 in 10,000 children. Now, if we move forward to 2005, the incidence of autism had skyrocketed to 1 in 150. So autism is truly now of epidemic proportions. Now, basic science reveals that genetic mutations is a very slow process that occurs over many, many generations. But this skyrocketing in the incidence of autism basically occurred over the course of one generation. This is like 3 decades. we have seen almost a 40-fold increase. Now that should tell you that autism is primarily an environmental, is primarily caused by environmental factors and not genetic mutations. And the primary insight of the GAPS protocol is that the root cause of autism is gut dysbiosis. That is an imbalance in gut microorganisms. Because the human body is a symbiotic being. We are the union of human cells and a plethora of microorganisms. So, the human body is composed of 10 trillion cells, but within that body, primarily in the digestive tract, we house over 100 trillion microorganisms. So, for every human cell, we carry 10 bacterial cells. And not only bacteria, we also carry numerous yeast, fungi, viruses, protozoa, worms, and other types of microorganisms. And these microorganisms play a critical role in health generally, and also in the growth and maturation of the brain. So, how does gut dysbiosis lead to autism? Well, autism is a disruption in the development of the brain. So in the growth and division of neuron cells and the other various cells in the brain, and also in the wiring of the brain. And this complex process is orchestrated by numerous chemicals. Now, when there is an imbalance in the gut no longer is a source of nourishment, but becomes a source of toxicity. So, let me just roughly draw a human frame so that is recognizable. This is the brain, and then we know, okay, this is the small intestine, this is the large intestine, and these are the two areas of the digestive tract that we're primarily interested in, the small intestine and the large intestine. One could say, what is the relationship between the small intestine, between these digestive organs and the brain? Well, the gut is also a neurological tissue, and it houses over 100 million neurons, possibly even more neurons than are in the spinal cord, for example. But aside from the neuron count, the gut, when there is an imbalance in gut bacteria, when we eat food, this food is converted into a lot of toxic products. And when there is also gut dysbiosis, the gut, the integrity, so if this is just a cross-section of the large intestine, it tends to become leaky. So there is a room for the contents of the gut to enter into circulation. And what enters into circulation are many undigested proteins and many toxic products, such as lipopolysaccharides, that are formed by the harmful bacteria that live within the gut. And these harmful toxins are transported to the brain. And these toxic chemicals that are generated within the body disrupt the process of cell division, of synapse formation. That is essentially the wiring of the brain, which requires a very finely tuned chemical balance. But a toxic gut reverberates throughout the body, because this toxicity does not remain in the gut, but becomes systemic, and its effect on the brain is that it disrupts normal brain development. So, the root of the problem is in the gut, that disrupts the development of the brain, that now manifests itself as autistic symptoms. So, what causes gut dysbiosis? And the cause of gut dysbiosis, we can also see it in the statistics of of autism as well. Because from the 1970s onwards, that's when many developed societies really transitioned fully to this highly processed food diet. That is where primarily what we eat are refined grains, vegetable oils, very high intake of sugar, of high fructose corn syrup, of many packaged foods that contain many neurotoxic additives, such as artificial sweeteners like aspartame, sucralose, and then also flavor enhancers like monosodium glutamate. And all these very low quality foods, on the one hand, they don't provide sufficient nutrients for normal brain development, because the brain is made up of things that we eat. It's a structure primarily composed of numerous fats, some proteins, some cholesterol, and all these raw materials come from the diet. But this highly processed food diet provides poor building materials for the brain, and then also this highly processed food diet promotes the growth of harmful bacteria. So gut dysbiosis is a reference to the shift of gut microorganisms from beneficial microorganisms to harmful microorganisms. Because when we eat a normal diet, that's a whole foods diet or an ancestral diet, we have a more balanced gut flora, and that also leads to balanced brain development. But when we have this highly processed food diet that promotes the growth of toxic bacteria, then we also have abnormal brain development. So the GAPS protocol is really of two things. It's the detoxification. That is, it's to help the body purge itself of these harmful bacteria. And then it's also consuming high quality nutrition that will provide sufficient raw materials for the brain to heal and repair itself. Because regeneration is intrinsic in the intelligence in the body. So, a very important plank of the GAPS protocol is the removal of processed foods from the diet of the autistic child. So, things like soft drinks, things made with refined grains, like fruit, bread, pastas, instant noodles, those things are out of the window, including milk products, so especially pasteurized milk. So things like ice cream, yogurt, out the window. So basically, packaged processed foods are the roots of the diet. Time will not allow me to list out all these things, but it's really the understanding that it's about the modern diet, and it's about how it provides poor nutrition and how it promotes the growth of harmful bacteria. So processed foods largely out the window. And then also within those processed foods, even in home cooked meals, certain ingredients really have to be thrown out the window. For example, vegetable oil, because vegetable oil creates an imbalance in the fatty acids in the body, because vegetable oils provide a lot of omega-6 fatty acids which disrupt brain development, and also vegetable oils contain a lot of trans fats which are harmful not only to the brain but to every organ system in the body. So vegetable oils are a big no-no. And then also monosodium glutamate, which typically in home cooked meals are in seasoning cubes, or because these seasoning cubes are loaded with MSG, and MSG is a potent neurotoxin, and it just exacerbates the underlying problems that cause autism. And unfortunately for us, almost every packaged food contains MSG under various names. MSG is not called MSG on most labels. It could be called natural flavoring, or seasonings, or yeast extract, or modified cornstarch. So many different names, because the industry recognizes that people are understanding how harmful MSG is to the brain and to other organs in the body, so they call it under many names. So it's about the removal of this highly processed food diet, and the adoption of what I can call an ancestral diet. So what are some of the things that are involved? Well, one, vegetable juicing is a useful part of the GAPS protocol. And I think a useful combination would be cucumber, lime, and ginger. Because the GAPS protocol is about detoxification. It's about gradually altering gut flora. And this particular combination, it doesn't contain much sugar, because sugar promotes the growth of many harmful bacteria. So one really has to limit the intake of many of all refined carbohydrates. So soft drinks, fruit juices, malt drinks, milk drinks, all breakfast cereals, all those things are out the window. So this combination is a good start, because especially like ginger will help in destroying a lot of those pathogenic bacteria, and lime as well. So as well as this, it's also very useful to ferment vegetables. So one can ferment vegetables at home, and fermented vegetables is a good source of good bacteria, of probiotics, and these bacteria help to reseed the gut, right? So they help to replace the harmful bacteria, and they help to promote balance in the gut. So one way that one could make a fermented vegetable at home would be if you shred some cabbage. So maybe a combination of cabbage, carrot, and beetroot, and you shred a reasonable amount, and you take a glass jar. So for example, this is a glass mason jar, and you fill it up with these shredded vegetables, and then you now add brine solution. And brine solution is basically when you take 1 liter of water, and then you add to it 1 teaspoon of salt. So this is mildly salty water. So you have these vegetables, and then you now add mildly salty water to the brim of the glass jar, and mason jars have an airtight lid. So you now lock it with that airtight lid, and then you allow this to sit at room temperature for at least 4 days. Because during those 4 days, very beneficial bacteria grow and multiply within the glass jar, and they also transform those vegetables. And this is a very, very nutritious food, even even outside the GAPS protocol. This is a very, very potent superfood for the promotion of health in the body. So basically, the detoxification and regeneration, it comes from high quality nutrition, and it will really involve research on your own part, because it's not really possible to list all the bad things and to tell you all the good things, but it's just to have that paradigm. The root of the problem is this highly processed foods, is these vegetable oils, is this refined grains, is this trans fats, is this excess consumption of sugar. And the solution is more whole foods. So even like in this environment, like in Nigeria now, starchy root vegetables such as your yam, your sweet potato, your beetroot, these are whole foods, and this should form the core of the diet. And all these and like vegetable oils, you can easily replace them with palm oil, and maybe elsewhere you can also replace that with like coconut oil. That is oils that are not hydrogenated. That is oils that do not contain trans fats, and that oils that have a more favorable balance of fatty acids that do not disrupt the brain so much. Additionally, autism has been linked with a vitamin D deficiency, and an easy way to get high quality vitamin D is not from these pills. I will recommend sunbathing. That is, between 10 to 2, you just spend like 15 minutes under the sun, you know, where you expose your chest and most of your legs and your arms. Maybe 7 minutes on one side, 7 minutes on the other side. So you don't need so much exposure, but what you need is a regular exposure to peak sun, because that allows your body to produce adequate amounts of vitamin D. Additionally, when we're talking about foods that promote regeneration in the body, some of the most nutrient-dense foods are organ meats. Now, organ meats, we tend to disregard them and eat more muscle meats, you know, but muscle meats are much less nutrient-dense than, for example, the liver and the kidneys. So, for example, cow liver is an excellent food. And if you find the taste disagreeable, you can also finely chop it and then add it into meals such as like stews and soups, and then, you know, it's no longer overpowering than, you know, if you're trying to just eat the liver by itself. So you can finely chop it and discreetly add it into meals that you prepare for your child, because it contains the right fats. It contains all the essential vitamins, the essential minerals, especially liver. So liver is an important part of this GAPS protocol. Now, by no means have I gone into any, you know, into explaining the, you know, the full depth of the GAPS protocol. That's why I recommend, it's important that you also you know, do your own research, and you look and you visit the website of Dr. Natasha Campbell-Mcbride. That's www.gaps.me, where you can get a fuller discussion of this very powerful protocol. Well, I hope you found this talk useful. Thank you so much for your time.